We can begin talking whenever. Let me start it off by saying that that I've been fascinated by this incredible book that you put together, "The Virgin Shall Give Birth," the validity of the traditional doctrine of the SCOTUS explanations of Mary's cooperation with a miracle. And I do a lot of work in Mariology, and indeed, Blessed Duns Scotus is one of my all-time favorites. I love everything SCOTUS. Everything that I can get my hands on in English, I've gotten my hands on, I've read. So this book was recommended to me by many people. Many very good people said it was the very best one on the topic, and I have to agree. It's a one of a kind. I'd like to ask you first off, what inspired you to want to write this book?
Well, in part, I had to write a doctoral thesis or a licentiate thesis. But what got me interested in this topic specifically was that back, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I'd translated a paper on the cooperation of our Lady in the miraculous conception according to Blessed John Duns Scotus for one of the symposiums that we did on co-redemption in England. And so doing that translation, I'd come to know what Scotus said about this. And a few years after that, I was at a Scotus day, and we had a few talks for our seminarians. Well, I was a seminarian at that point, and after one of these talks, there were questions, and there was a professor there, not one of our seminary professors, but a visiting professor who'd given a talk, and he was arguing that Our Lady couldn't really have given birth as a virgin, because in that case, basically, if she gave birth as a virgin, she wouldn't really be a mother. She wouldn't have done anything. And so, listening to this argument, and our professors responded to him by pointing out what the fathers teach, what the doctrine of the Catholic Church is, and tried to show him that what he was saying was not really compatible with the tradition of the Church. And but they didn't get anywhere. They were sort of at cross purposes, because he couldn't really accept that teaching without losing the teaching about Our Lady being truly the mother of Jesus. And so what I had the idea at that point that if I could only show how this idea of cooperation, that Our Lady cooperated with the birth, cooperated with the miracle, as Scotus said for the conception. If we can take that and apply it to the birth, then we have a solution which saves both Our Lady's maternity and her virginity. That it's not really contrary to Mary's, doesn't really take anything away from from Mary's maternity to say that she gave birth as a virgin. So, I mean, basically the problem there is that people sort of, I put it briefly in my book. Basically, the problem is this: they see that if the virgin birth was a miracle, then a miracle is something that God does. So if God did it, then Mary didn't do it, and so then it would be God giving birth, just sort of using Mary's body, or God bringing miraculously the child out of Mary's body without her really having anything to do with it. And that's really a misunderstanding, at least according to these theologians that I study in the book, that what the miracle does is make possible a kind of birth which is virginal, a kind of birth which is only possible by a miracle, but this miraculous birth is nevertheless a true birth. So Mary gives birth very much like a mother normally does, except that because of the miracle, there is no resistance from her body, and Jesus can pass through her body, leaving her body virginal without any loss of her virginity, essentially.
Now, you having a fantastic section in the book dealing with Isaiah chapter 7. Now, if we read Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, where it reads, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." As you know very well, as you incredibly lay out how that comes to fulfillment in the New Testament. Are we able to get anything from that text? Perhaps because when I read it, it does read quite perplexing. A virgin is going to conceive, and a virgin is going to bear a child. That really does seem to me like a miraculous virgin birth, as the text does say. Am I reading it correctly? So would that be a correct reading of the text?
Well, it would be correct, although, if we're just talking about Isaiah sort of in isolation without reference to the New Testament, there's a question as to whether that Hebrew word Alma actually means virgin. So if it just means young woman, then you don't need any miracle for a young woman to conceive and give birth. But really what tells you that it's a miracle is the context that Isaiah has offered to give the king a sign, and a sign as high as the heavens above or as deep as the netherworld below. So the sign is a great miracle, and so it's really that context that tells you that we're definitely talking about something miraculous here, and not just an ordinary woman giving birth. So I mean, in that sense, yes. The problem, as far as the theologians who contested the traditional doctrine of the virgin birth, is that to say that a virgin gives birth doesn't really say what it means to be a virgin. And so they were redefining virgin in order to eliminate the conflict with Mary's virginity, because they didn't see this idea that Mary could cooperate with the miracle.
That is very interesting. Now you bring up that Hebrew word Alma. Is that word when you look at the usage of that word, does it fall more on one side as to it being the times it appears? Is it more often used for young women? Is it ever used for virgin? What are your thoughts on that, or have you been able to do a search on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Catholic theologian or Catholic exegetes have pointed out for centuries that there's no case in which this word is used in which the woman is clearly not a virgin. So they were arguing that it actually does mean virgin,
right?
At least until recently. No, more recently in the last century, Catholic exegetes have been willing to concede that this word does mean young woman. But if we're talking about it in a Catholic or in a Christian context, really, then we have to take that in terms of the fulfillment in the New Testament, and there in the Greek, both Luke and Matthew are clearly using the word for virgin when Matthew quotes the verse and Luke alludes to the verse. So in the case of its fulfillment, it's definitely a virgin. And the only thing which is really in question with young woman is whether the Jews before the New Testament would have understood that as a prediction that a virgin was going to give birth. But it's the context that helps us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you bring out that the context very, very well. Now, in the early church, this is a question that rarely ever does get brought up. In terms of Mary's physical integrity, is there a consensus in the early church as to whether that physical integrity was not damaged?
Well, there's definitely a consensus about her being a virgin. And then when you ask what does a virgin mean, then we get into a more difficult thing. Is a virgin simply a woman who has never had sex? And well, whatever happens during birth, that's not sex. So that the woman would remain a virgin in that case. Or does it have something to do with the physical state of her body? And as traditionally it is understood, and in that case, then she's only a virgin if there is that physical integrity. No, and the thing about the early church is that there are relatively few documents from the early church, both because of the antiquity and because of the fact that the church was smaller at the beginning.
Yeah.
So we don't have an abundance of evidence. It's very clear in the Proto-Evangelium of James, which is an apocryphal document from the mid or late 2nd century, that Our Lady was physically intact. That's clearly the position of the author of that document. There isn't really another one that's quite so clear in that period, but basically, if we want to look at what St. John Paul II says, that he says that when the church says virgin, it means virgin in the ordinary sense of the word. It doesn't mean a sense of virgin that you need to be theologically subtle to work out. But he means virgin as anyone ordinarily means virgin.
Which does make a lot of sense. But you do bring up very, very good points there. What I was fascinated with is the massive amount of information in the book. And for people that when you're watching the show, there's no possible way that we can do justice to the massive amount of incredible information. I have to really say, Father, that you've done incredible work here. The amount of early church fathers you go into, you touch upon, and we'll talk about him in a moment, a figure that I was not very well acquainted with in the 2nd century. But before I touch upon him, you deal with the great St. Ignatius of Antioch and show how this reading of this incredible sign, this incredible prophecy is being taught as early as St. Ignatius of Antioch. So you bring up the point that the church was very small, and of course we don't have voluminous writings. A lot of the early fathers are being killed, going to their martyrdom. We don't have a lot of the writings, or perhaps writings of many of them that maybe have been lost to history. In fact, if we look at figures such as Papias, we have very few writings. Bishop Polycarp, St. Polycarp, we only have one letter. Pope St. Clement of Rome, only one authentic letter. So it is amazing, though, when we look in the early church, we do have this kind of reading, this kind of understanding. And it does seem to me that it's very incredibly early on with Ignatius of Antioch. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, in St. Ignatius, we have both the confession that our Lord was born of a virgin and that he was truly born. So he was truly born of a virgin and he was truly born. He doesn't really go into in any detail what he means by virgin. So, the logical thing would be to assume that he means by virgin what the ordinary, non-theologically subtle person means by virgin.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing in St. Ignatius is that he's also saying that our Lord was truly born of Mary. So he doesn't see the virgin birth as taking anything away from Mary's maternity.
Now, one thing that does get brought up, Father, and I wonder how you would answer it. It is an objection that that has been coming up lately. I don't know how long it's been used, but as of late, for the past 20, 30 years, we hear from the evangelical side, some evangelicals, that the birth of Mary had to have been normal and had to have destroyed her physical integrity. Otherwise, the church would be teaching that that Christ beamed out of Mary, and that would have been Gnostic. But I've never read any early fathers, and when they talk about it being a virgin birth, I've never read about them talking about her beaming, Christ beaming out of Mary. Excuse me for that heretical error. Christ beaming out of Mary. I've never read that. But that I think, even as you pointed out, even if we were to say that the physical integrity would be damaged, even though I've not found that in the early fathers, that would not then eliminate the fact that Mary remained virgin and was, i.e. Parthenos, ever virgin. But do you find any fathers? Have you ever encountered any fathers that taught that Christ essentially beamed out of Mary?
Well, I mean, you have to go forward a couple of centuries before you get a description of exactly
Yeah.
what they think happened in the birth. And so, no, you don't have obviously no. There's no one who explicitly saying that Christ beamed out of Mary. But basically, what you have in those Protestants is the same misunderstanding of the miraculous birth that we have in 20th century theologians who contested the traditional doctrine of the virgin birth. Basically, the idea that if it's a miracle, then Mary didn't do anything. Christ just left left Mary's body, maybe went out the side of her womb or something like that. So I mean, when we have in the 4th century, we do have fathers who are more explicit about describing what they think the virgin birth was like. And so there's a sermon attributed to Saint Ephrem, but probably not by him, but by someone else, some other preacher in Greek, rather than in Syriac like Saint Ephrem, according to which there was a miraculous expansion or dilation, so that everything just sort of stretched, and that way Jesus was able to pass out of Mary's body without any loss of Mary's virginal integrity. And then in Saint Epiphanius of Salamis, and then later in Saint John Damascene, we have explicit statements that Christ did pass through the birth canal and did not come out the side of Mary or any such strange thing like that, as apparently someone had theorized. So in terms of church fathers, no, we don't have anyone saying that Jesus beamed out of Mary or slipped out the side of her stomach, but someone must have said that before Saint John Damascene. We don't know who, in order for him to feel the need to deny that was what happened.
Now, in the great Saint John Damascene, when he talks about Mary, Christ coming out of Mary, is that a kind of does he describe it similar to the way the pseudo Ephrem described it, or does he go into detail about that at all?
Well, no, he doesn't really go into detail. He just insists that Christ did pass through the birth canal.
Okay. Now, would that imply, or does he ever even get into the language of perhaps it damaging the physical integrity? Because I have never run into that in St. John Damascene, but I have read him talking about Mary's womb being an ensouled heaven and all kinds of incredible language. But that I've never encountered. Have you examined that?
Well, what you have in St. John Damascene that makes it clear how he understands the virgin birth is a reference to the prophecy of Ezekiel about the port of the gate of the temple remaining ever closed.
Yeah.
So starting with Saint Ambrose is the oldest one who writes this, although it may go back even before him to the Synod of Rome. In basically, no, Isaiah, or rather, Ezekiel had prophesied that the gate of the temple would remain ever closed because the prince had come out through it. So the Mary's virginal womb is a gate that remains ever closed, and we find reference to that in St. John Damascene. So he's saying, on the one hand, that Jesus passed through the birth canal, and on the other hand, that Mary's womb remained forever closed. And then the other thing that we have in many fathers that gives us an idea of how they understand it is a parallel with with Christ leaving the closed tomb. So some people don't quite understand why it is that the angel came down and opened the tomb. They have the idea that he opened the tomb so that he wouldn't let Jesus out, but Jesus was already gone from the tomb at that point. He opens the tomb in order to show the women who have come to anoint the body of Jesus that the body of Jesus is no longer there. And so as Christ left the closed tomb and as he entered the closed cenacle with his risen body, so before that he left the closed womb of Our Lady. And there's a lot of respect here for the mystery. They don't go into detail about how it happened. They say this is just something that God can do because God has this power to allow one object to pass through another. Essentially, it's
no doubt. Yes, amen to that. We realize God can do anything, and we realize there are miraculous things that occur all throughout Scripture, throughout history. That without a doubt is definitely correct. Now, you brought up a number of amazing things. I wanted to ask you. You said that might have originated at the Synod of Rome. What Synod of Rome is that? Were they discussing anything in particular at that gathering?
That was the one. Yeah. Well, let me look at my book and refresh my memory on that. I believe was in the year 393.
Okay. Yeah, and while you do that, no rush at all. While you do that, I'll note that very interesting that you do bring up Ambrose, because Ambrose, like the great Saint Jerome, were incredible defenders of the perpetual virginity of Mary. So that's very interesting. Ambrose, I know, did defend the virgin birth as well.
Yeah, so I found the reference. It was indeed in mid 393. So what was going on there was the problem of Jovinian, and Jovinian was a heretic who had fundamentally challenged the ascetical tradition of the church. He had the idea that baptism is enough. If you are baptized, then you're saved, and whatever you do after baptism isn't going to change anything. So no, there's no point in practicing virginity and making a vow of chastity. There's no point in living a life of penance, because all the baptized are equal. And so in response to that, his opponents, fathers of the church and other people, pointed out this tradition that our Lord even chose to be born of a virgin, and so then he started denying also that Mary was a virgin in the birth, and so that's where at least later, possibly in the Synod of Rome, from which we don't have any documents directly.
Yeah.
But certainly Ambrose in Milan in late 390 or later in 393 said no. This is a fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel that the port, or the gate of the temple will remain ever closed.
Now, Jovinian, do we have any information on Jovinian like we have? Well, we don't have a lot of information on Helvidius, but we know that Helvidius denied Mary as ever virgin. Was Jovinian also viewed as kind of an Arian kind of heretic as well? Because if we look at multiple scholars and we look at statements of early historians, we see that they say that Helvidius was trained by the bishop Auxentius, who was an Arian bishop. Is there any information on Jovinian in that sense, that he was also part of a heretical group, or did he merely harbor heretical views?
Well, I didn't really do an exhaustive research on Jovinian. I just looked at basic background on him, and in what I saw, there wasn't anything about him having a connection with Arians.
Okay.
Certainly there were lots of Arians around, so it may happen to be the case that he was trained by an Arian. But I don't think we have any of his writings. What we have really is the church fathers who oppose him, what they wrote against him.
Yeah.
So we know what he said by what they accuse him of saying.
Yeah, and they definitely rose up strongly against him. So very clear that the church really did defend this traditional teaching. Now, here's another question that will probably just get brought up often. In terms of this being a virgin birth, this being a miraculous birth, and in terms of the physical integrity, has the church ever defined that, or has that never really become Did that ever get discussed at any council, perhaps any ecumenical council, if you're aware of?
Well, an ecumenical council, no. I mean, basically the question is what does the dogmatic definition, which was not by Martin I, Saint Martin I, in 649. So that's essentially the equivalent of an ex cathedra definition, because it wasn't an ecumenical council that he called. He just called the bishops, basically of Italy and a few outside Italy to a synod, and there condemned the errors of the monoenergists, and along with them defined that Mary is virgin before the birth, during the birth, and after the birth. And he said that this was according to the Holy Fathers. So then if we look at how the Holy Fathers understand Mary's virginity in the birth, we see that does imply physical integrity.
Yeah. And the amazing thing, Father, that I've noticed, because I've done a lot of research into the topic of Mary as ever virgin, is that, as you know very well, in the early church, amongst the greatest Christologists of the church, it was definitely a mark of orthodoxy to recognize Mary as ever virgin. So you find it brought up, even though it was not defined, as early as Chalcedon in the tome of Pope Saint Leo the Great. So this Mariology has been defended, proper Mariology, from the very beginning. One figure you did bring up that I wasn't really aware of, was incredible. I think you bring it up, but again, once the show does air, I will have a link down there to the book. I think people should definitely get the book. They have to get a copy of it. It's fantastic. Is a figure by the name of Saint Aristides. I hope I'm not butchering that name. Now, he's from the 2nd century. Do we have a lot from him? Is he an important figure? What? Why did you decide to include him in here? He must be important?
Well, he's an apologist from the 2nd century, so early to mid 2nd century. So what I wanted to do was to look at everything that I could find from the earliest centuries. Yeah. Because essentially some of these theologians from the 20th century, Jean Galot in particular, said that at the time of Ambrose, or essentially Ambrose himself would be responsible for this. Ambrose changed the doctrine of the church on the virgin birth, according to this theologian who taught for many years at the Gregorianum, the Jesuits' university in Rome. Wow. And yeah, so no, so he's not denying that Mary is a virgin. He's just denying that being a virgin means something physical about Mary's body. Yeah, I'm not sure myself of. I would say Aristides, but
okay, my bad.
No, I read about him, but I didn't really talk about him with people who were speaking English, so I'm not certain of the usual English pronunciation. So he's interesting, or at least he's the first source that's in Journées, well, he's the first, the oldest source that I found in the collections of patristic quotations. So there's Jurgens has a collection translated into English of quotations, and this was the first one in there. So I wanted to study that passage. It turns out at the end that we don't really know if Aristides wrote the words that I was particularly interested in. Okay. So the problem with Aristides' apology is that we don't have the original Greek. It was a very popular work, and it was so popular that it was recycled as a standard apologetics for the Christian faith. And in terms of it being recycled, it was sometimes modified as it was recycled. So I think it's in Armenia that in the Acts of Martyrs, when they defend the faith against their persecutors, they quote things from Aristides as their defense of the faith. And in this life of Barlaam, that's been attributed to St. John Damascene, but maybe a little after him. We have a reworked version of the original Greek apology. But in reworking it, some of those words might have changed. So what I was very interested in was the fact that in this Greek text, at least as it's reworked, there's the very same word used to describe Mary's virginity that we find in the definition in 649. So if indeed Aristides in the 2nd century used this word to say that Mary is incorrupt, that is, incorrupt means physically intact as a virgin. If indeed he used that word in the 2nd century, then what the definition of 649 was using was something that went all the way back to there. We also have translations of this apology into Syriac and another language. I think it might be Armenian. And in these translations, we don't find a word that corresponds to that. But those translations also seem to have some variations from the original as well. So it's a bit hard to say what exactly was the original text. But so he almost certainly said that Mary was a virgin. That was part of the baptismal creed in his time. But he probably didn't use that word, which occurred later in the definition. So it's
very fascinating. There's incredible information there, Father. You bring up around page 33, apparent witnesses to a contrary doctrine, and you bring up the usual suspects. Now, when I say usual suspects, I mean Tertullian of Carthage, and then you have Origen of Alexandria there. Tertullian of Carthage, as we know, unfortunately, very likely died outside of the church. I have never found any compelling evidence of him having returned, despite the one church father trying to make the case for that. I find no evidence of that. I think St. Jerome was very clear. So Tertullian is problematic in a number of areas, though. But does Tertullian deny this doctrine? Is he a contrary witness to it?
Well, he's in a way he's a contrary witness in that he's later in his career, after he basically left the church, in order to defend the incarnation, in order to defend the fact that Christ had real flesh, he described in also somewhat crude terms the birth of Christ in a way that makes it very clear that he does not believe that Mary's virginity was virginal integrity, physical integrity was preserved in that birth. And so, I mean, what he's trying to do is to say that Christ had a real body. But in his attempt to say that Christ had a real body, he gave up another doctrine, which apparently wasn't as important to him, at least not at that point. But so in a way he's a contrary witness. But if we go back and look at what he'd written earlier in his career, we see that he did not seem to think the same way at that time. So it seems that when he was a Catholic, he did believe in Mary's physical integrity. And then afterwards, when he became a heretic, he gave up that for another thing. You know, I don't know if you know the word heresis. It means choice. And so it's basically choosing one part of the truth and clinging to that and tossing out the other parts, which you don't quite manage to fit in together. So that's sort of the problem that he had there. So he's a contrary witness, but not when he's got Catholic.
It truly does show you the shift in Tertullian's thought when he becomes Montanist and he abandons the true church. It really is an unfortunate situation, heartbreaking reading his writings, how he goes from being, in my opinion, one of the greatest defenders of the faith, incredible titan of a figure, to then being an unfortunate hostile witness and attacking multiple tenets of the faith. great points you bring up there. Origen of Alexandria, who we know, did not formally leave the church the way Tertullian did, but as we know very well, was condemned, a number of problems with his theology. Does Origen of Alexandria also provide a problem? Is he a witness to the contrary position?
Well, I argue that he's not.
Yeah.
So what Origen does say is that he's talking about what we have at the presentation. Every male who opens the womb shall be holy to the Lord. And so he said that this was something that was really only truly fulfilled in Jesus, because if we take opening the womb to mean something about physical integrity of a woman, then any other baby who is born who is not conceived in a virginal way is not taking away the physical integrity of his mother in being born, because she was no longer a virgin 9 months before that, or at least 9 months before that. But in Origen's case, what we have is we also have other things that Origen said about the virgin birth. And when we look at the other things that he said about the virgin birth, he doesn't seem to be saying that Mary lost her physical integrity. So one of these is that he says that Zechariah was killed for introducing Mary into the part of the temple that was only allowed, or where only virgins were allowed to go, and he said that she was still a virgin, and so that was that's one thing, and another text is a commentary of Origen on a psalm where he talks about the father drawing the son out of the womb. So there he seems to clearly have the idea of a miraculous birth. The problem with Origen, a fundamental problem with Origen in general, and the reason why he's such a controversial figure, and people debate even today about how orthodox or non-orthodox he was, is that he says different things in different places, and sometimes he says things that he just wants to put out there as an opinion to consider, but it's not a firm conviction of his.
That is a very good point. Very good points that you bring up. And Origen, as you very well know, I'm trying to remember exactly where it was. I don't remember the exact work, but he also does seem to affirm what is laid out in the Proto-Evangelium of James, that second century apocryphal text, in terms of when he's discussing Mary remaining perpetual virgin. That's one of the areas he talks about in multiple areas. So that would indicate, in my opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that would seem to me that he would believe that that she did remain virginally intact, as that does seem to be laid out very clearly in that document. So I mean, I guess perhaps we could that could be implied from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it could be implied. He makes a reference to it. I don't know that I'm not sure whether he refers specifically to that, or whether he was talking about the idea that there was a midwife at the birth.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I guess getting back to this idea of opening the womb, Origen is not the only one who talks about opening the womb. St. Ambrose is another one. And Saint Epiphanius is another one still. So when they talk about opening the womb, the question is really what they mean by opening the womb. Do they mean it like that pseudo Ephraim text, where opening means that everything sort of stretched and then it went back like it was before? Or are they talking about opening the womb in what is really the biblical sense of the term, where this is essentially a Hebrew idiom. To close the womb is to take away take away fertility from a woman. So we have women whose womb was closed in Genesis, and that means that they were not able to have children. And then to open their womb is to make them able to have children. So it's so in that sense, opening Mary's womb, it means simply giving her the ability to conceive, which is what happens in the virginal conception already. So
I'm sorry, Father. Go ahead.
sorry. So basically, these fathers who seem to be a contrary witness, the ones that talk about opening the womb, are really saying something ambiguous that we have to take in the context of other texts that are saying quite clearly that Mary's physical integrity was preserved.
One objection that I've heard brought up, I don't think it's a very good one, but there are a number of evangelicals that do believe it to be a very compelling one, and I don't know if it is a modern one or if it is an objection to be found in antiquity, but they will point to Luke 2. Say the Gospel of St. Luke chapter 2. They'll say the birth had to have been a natural one and had to have been one that did destroy physical integrity, because in Luke 2, there is the purification of Mary and the child, and that purification is indicative of basically it's a purification from blood having been the physical integrity having been destroyed through a normal natural birth. And they say, well, there you've got it right there in Luke 2. Now, of course, I've looked at numerous early church fathers that provide an exegesis of Luke 2. I've never found any that ever provide that kind of insight to the text. But you correct me if I'm wrong, Father. Even if we were to say that the child, there was blood in the kind of birth, it still wouldn't entail physical destruction of the physical integrity, because we could look at it in the manner which was described by Pseudo-Ephraim, and that very likely still could have occurred in terms of blood being present there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess the question is where the blood would come from. But right. Basically, traditional Catholic commentaries on the purification say that Mary wanted to be purified, even though she didn't need to be purified.
Yeah.
Even though there was nothing impure there. So.
Yeah, I think it would be. I totally agree with you. I think there would be a big problem if we're going to argue that Mary needed a purification here, that it was necessary, because it's not only Mary that undergoes a purification. As you know very well in the Greek, it's a child as well. So if you're going to argue that Mary needed the purification, well, then you're going to have trouble proving that our Lord also needed that purification if you're going to go down to the strict letter of the text. And I think that would create a lot of problems for people if they're going to try and argue that. So I agree. I've never found any church father, and I've looked at a lot of them. Yeah. So I think that's
there's something about this that you might find interesting. It's something I saw St. Lawrence of Brindisi point out in one of his sermons, which is that if you take this text about who needs to be purified, and you go back and you look at it in the Hebrew, it's a very strange kind of law, because it's a law written in a way that excludes only a virgin mother. Because what it says is that if a woman receives seed and gives birth to a child, then she needs to be purified. But Mary didn't receive any seed.
Yeah. Because
she conceived a virgin, as any Protestant, any Orthodox Protestant would agree. So if you want to say that Mary is being purified because she has to be purified because of blood, then the very law that you're citing in order to say that she has to be purified has a specific exception for Mary, because she did not receive seed in order to conceive.
I had never ever pondered upon that. That's an incredible point. I've got to really ponder upon that. I've got to really digest that. That's really, really good. And I think that would eliminate that. That would cause quite the number of problems for those that are trying to argue about that particular passage. Now, there's so much in this incredible book. There's so much. You even get to The dogma over the centuries. Let me see. I'm trying to see. Yes, one of my favorite areas, because I love the blessed Duns Scotus, who I'm hoping will be properly canonized one day. That is something that we can hope for. We can definitely pray for it. It should have already happened. But the great blessed Duns Scotus, Father, what does he have to say about this? Does he provide any insight? Is there any kind of controversy during his time? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, basically, in the Middle Ages, there was no controversy about this, or at least in the time of Saint Thomas and of Blessed John Duns Scotus.
Yeah.
So, in their commentaries on the sentences of Peter Lombard, they don't really have anything to say about the virgin birth. At least not directly. They never address it directly because it's not a theological problem. It's just something that everyone knows. So there's not really anything to see there, or anything to study. So what Scotus studies is how it's possible for Mary to cooperate with the virginal conception, because the conception is a miracle, and so if it's a miracle, it's something that's beyond human power to do, especially the problem, at least in terms of medieval biology and ancient biology, of a conception that takes place instantaneously when Mary says yes, when Mary says her fiat.
Yeah.
And so that is something that he goes into in detail. The virgin birth and the integrity, the fact that one body passes through another in the virgin birth, is something that he uses as a premise for arguments, but it's not something that he develops theologically because no one doubted it.
I see. Those very good points. And indeed, as we know, the Blessed Duns Scotus is that great defender of Holy Mary's all immaculate conception. And in my opinion, one of the greatest figures in church history. Provides incredible insight there. You provide the one thing that I found so magnificent is you don't only touch upon Blessed Duns Scotus, you provide a ton of information on classic Scotus, such as one that I have read on. I've done a number of research in Francis Meyronis, and there's just so much magnificent information in this book. Let me ask you this. Before we conclude, what would be, and I want to show the book to the audience again, an incredible book. I've gone through most of it. I need maybe about 20 pages because I like to read over and over to fully get the stuff. What would be the main message of this book that you would perhaps want people that read it to take away from it? Do you have a main message that you would like somebody, Catholic, Orthodox, evangelical, whatever faith tradition, for them to take away from this great book?
Well, essentially, there are two parts to the book. And the first part of the book is trying to show, and I believe it does show convincingly, that the traditional Catholic understanding of the virgin birth is the understanding of the fathers, and is what the popes meant when they taught it in their magisterium, including in the dogmatic definition in 649. So that the virgin birth, it does not just mean that Mary never had sex with a man, but it means, which would hardly be necessary to define. You wouldn't really need a triple dogma if the virgin birth doesn't add anything to the fact that the conception was virginal.
Yeah.
So this implies physical integrity. It applies, at least according to the great majority of theologians and fathers of the church, that there was no blood, and it means that there was no pain, because Mary is the new Eve, and so she, being immaculate, is not subject to the curse of Eve, and so does not give birth in pain. And then the second part of the book is trying to show how this traditional doctrine of the virgin birth is completely consistent with Mary's maternity, with her being active and physically pushing in order to give birth. Because what the miracle does is, the miracle is not moving Jesus out of Mary's womb or beaming Jesus out or whatever, but the miracle is allowing one body to pass through another.
Yeah.
And so when Mary pushes, then the baby Jesus's body is able to pass through Mary's body and come out perfectly with, both of them perfectly intact. And so that's, I mean, the essential thing here is that the book is trying to show that cooperation is possible, and that cooperation is the thing people are forgetting about when they try to deny Mary's physical integrity in order to save her maternity.
I think those are fantastic points, and as we know very well, you're definitely correct about that, about Mary being all immaculate. We see that prophecy in Genesis 3, where just like the seed, the Messiah, the seed of the woman, would be at complete enmity with the devil, the woman would be at enmity as well. So we know that Mary was never under the dominion of the devil. When we encounter Mary in Luke 1, it's very clear that Mary is in full possession of grace. So I think those are, among many others, very, very important passages. When we look into the early church fathers, as you do great work and digging into them, we get this image, this picture comes out very clearly. I'd like to add that this is clearly taught in the fathers, and I think in scripture as well. I want to commend you for having done a fantastic job in the book, and then ask you, are you working on anything else? Is there a new book, maybe, hopefully in the future? Yeah, I've got to ask you that. Hopefully you'll say yes.
Well, I don't have a book in the works, no.
No. Any idea, maybe you'll, any project you might be undertaking anytime soon?
Well, the thing that I'm publishing right now as articles in a magazine is a study about something that the idea of Saint Maximilian, that if someone is consecrated to Our Lady, then it's possible to arrive even at the point of being transformed or transubstantiated into Mary. But wow, that's probably, that's sort of high mysticism. It's not really everyday apologetics.
Right.
If I did another project, I would probably like to look at Our Lady's mediation.
Wow. Yeah, I've got to tell you that would be humongous. I'll tell you from the perspective of the field that I do work in. I do a lot of work in Mariology, and that's one area where there is, as you probably know already, there's not a lot of information out there on that. Bits and pieces you can find on the internet if you Google it, but in terms of really scholarly, solid books on that topic, I think you'd be filling a gap, a very much needed gap. And Father, I've got to tell you, I've got to urge you, hopefully you do eventually pick that up. And if you do, would that be in the next couple of years or in the next few years?
Well, I have to see how much time I'll have. Unfortunately, I'm not a full-time scholar, so I work slowly.
Yeah. So let me give you the final few minutes before we wrap up to put a plug in. Do you want to tell your audience where they can find your writings, where they can read articles that you're working on? Do you have a web page? Anything you'd like to put a plug in for, Father? No. Anything?
Well, yeah, not really. I don't have. I mean, I have a page on academia.edu, but I don't have a lot of my articles there. I mean, mostly they've been published in magazines, and I haven't worked out getting the rights to put them on the internet myself.
And those magazines, are they available to purchase? Can people perhaps find them?
Yeah, it's Missio Immaculate Media International. So it's published by the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, and so there's a website for the magazine. Guess I can probably give you a URL for the website there.
Yeah, whenever you do get that URL, I'll definitely provide that. I'll put that down there so that when people are watching, when they're tuning into the show, they'll be able to click that. They'll check out anything else that you've been working on. Father, I greatly appreciate your time. I appreciate your time, your incredible insight, and thank you very much. I look forward to dialoguing with you again in the future.
Okay, good. Hope we can talk about something else in the future, or more about this if you want.
Yeah, let me just hit the